welcome back to Building a Web Application from Scratch. My name is Matt, and in this video, we're going to start planning our project out and building our epics, creating our tasks, and we're going to map out our entire project, our entire MVP. So if you remember from the last episode, let's go ahead and look. We chose how to pick the right tech stack, and in the one before that, it was how to plan our production ready web app. So if we go here quickly and scroll down, you can see we have our MVP goals and our MVP feature breakdown, right? So you can look back to this as a reminder, but for this particular one, we don't have a written article first for once, and we're just going to hop in and we're going to start planning out our project, but it's going to be based off of this MVP that we outlined for our to-do app. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. So actually, let's go back for a second. Go to the home page. So I'm using Lancer because it's a tool that I built. It has, everything you need for a freelancer to be able to manage projects with clients and stuff. So this is what I'm going to use. Feel free to use this. It does have a free subscription that allows you to have up to 3 projects for free. So you're able to use this and follow along totally for free if you'd like. Then any other project management tool would also work, such as Asana or Monday.com. It's whatever you'd want to use, right? But this is what I'm going to use. So feel free to sign up and follow along in this particular tool if you want. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. Alrighty, and you can see right now we don't have any tasks, we don't have any projects. So we're going to go ahead and go to our projects. We're going to create a new project and we're going to call this to do web app. Our to do web application project. Little dash. We don't have any bill, we don't have any customers, so we're just going to click submit. All right, so we got our project, and let's go ahead and hop in here. All right, so right now what we want to do is whenever you're building a web application, it's best to map out everything that you'd need. So this is going to give you a great foundation of what you would need in order to build this full-scale web application. So I don't know exactly how to start it, so I'm just going to dive in and do what I would do if I was, planning out one of these projects. I'm going to go ahead and go to Epics. And so the first thing we're going to want to do is I'm going to want to create an epic called set up the project. I'm not going to give it any estimations, anything like that. But let's see if we want to give it a description, right? So in order to set up this, I'm just going to type it out. Set up the project. We're going to need several tasks to accomplish this. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to need to create our set up our Nest.js server. We're going to need an Angular front end application needs to be built with Prime NG, and that's going to be our UI library. See, and then MongoDB, Atlas, and AWS accounts are going to need to be created, and collections built. Database is going to need to be connected to our API server. or I'll just say server. Our environment files are going to need to be created for both our Angular app and our Express server. And let's see, we're also going to have to set up basic security and logging as well. So I think this kind of covers everything that we would need to like generally set up the project. And not everything's going to be done at the same time. We may have a couple of these lingering as we build, but this should be a pretty solid pretty solid setup for what we're trying to accomplish. So go ahead and submit that. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's create another epic. And we're going to want to call this one, I think, we're going to need to create authentication. So let's go ahead. Create authentication. So if we're going to create our authentication, we'll just go ahead and we'll just put our tasks in there. So before we build more epics, let's go ahead and see what else we're going to do. So we set up our project. We need to create our authentication. Beyond creating our authentication, we're going to need to create the ability to edit profiles. We're going to need to create the ability for accounts, create the ability for lists, tasks, create data models, and deploy our application. So let's just go ahead. I'm just going to create all the epics. So let's go ahead and do create data models. We'll do that probably after we set up our project. Beyond creating our data models, we're going to need to say create profile functionality. And then we're going to need to create account functionality. We're going to need to create list functionality. We're going to need to be able to create task functionality. And then we're going to need to deploy our application. Okay, so let's see if we kind of think about it. Because when we build our app, so we're going to set it up, going to create our data models, which is going to be how everything's structured data-wise, and then create our authentication. So users are going to be able to log in or register, log in. Once they register, it's going to create a account. And once they have created an account, they should be able to then create lists and add tasks, and then we'll deploy it. So I think that really kind of covers everything that we would need epic wise. So this is like high level, right? Think about it as just breaking it up, the project up into little pieces, or not little pieces, but breaking it up into pieces. And this is a working, think of these epics and all these tasks as working documents, right? So we can create more. You can always add to this, right? What we're trying to do is just set this foundation to what this project is going to be, right? And so it takes a little time, but you really want to just kind of think through, what do I need to do to build the application and get it released, right? So I think as we go through this, again, I think we're going to get a good feel for everything that would need to be done in order to set it up and get a functioning application delivered. the things that are unique to our application are going to be our data models. Like you'll always have a data models epic because you're always going to have data models in a web application. And you're probably generally going to have some sort of profile. A user is going to exist as well as an account, right? But beyond that, for us specifically, lists and tasks are pretty individual to um, our application, and that's why I wanted to do application. I know it's more simple, but it's going to give us that full picture of how the web app is built while keeping the general foundation. I think that's pretty similar across applications, or the majority of them. So let's go ahead and start breaking this down into some tasks. All right, so the first thing we want to do is go for our setup our project, right? So we view our epic. We can see here there's nothing in it. So, right, no tasks. So let's go to our tasks, and we'll just go to all tasks. Let's go ahead and create a task. So in this, we're going to say set up Nest.js server. We're going to assign this to the set up the project epic. We'll assign it to me. And then let's say the Nest.js server needs to be set up to connect the Atlas MongoDB database along with a health check to ensure that the server is up and running. Hitting the health check API, we can ensure that requests can be made to check the health of the server. So let's see, anything else? Yeah, additionally, since we're going to be here, environment files should be created for a dev environment, a dev, staging, and production environment. All right. And that's going to allow us to, deploy this into different stages throughout our development. So let's go ahead and submit that. All right, create another task. This one, let's see, what do we want to call this one? So next one is, let's do our setting up our Angular front end application. So we're going to say set up Angular front end with PrimeNG. So we'll say an Angular project should be created with associated environment files. So we might as well create those while we create our project. It also should have PrimeNG installed as a UI library. We'll say, probably use Tailwind for CSS. Once installed, we should be able to test out our application with the UI library. Okay, submit. It's the next one we want to do. let's say, up a MongoDB collection. Assign that to me. We need to do that setup project. See if they want to give this a description. Say MongoDB needs to be created in Atlas with a collection. This then needs to be connected to our Nest.js server. All right. From here, we'll do our security logging. Don't know if we want to give a big description to this just yet. We'll just set it to the setup project. We probably won't tackle this right away. We'll probably go ahead and move on before we set up our basic. We'll just see how it goes. We just know that it's a task, right? So there's our first 4 tasks. So now let's go ahead and do our data models. So what we're going to need to do, actually, let's take a look at our epics again real quick. So we got our set up the project. We can see our tasks, right? So now that we're going to have our project set up, right? So we're going to have our Nest.js server set up. We're going to have our Angular application set up. There's not going to be a lot to it, but the foundation is going to be built, right? With a database connection, we're going to be able to start the app. It's going to tell us we're connected to our database in our development environment. We're going to have our Angular application that's going to be able to call our backend server, right? We're essentially ready to start developing. So from here, before we can actually build into that functional code, right? We've got our core. Now we need to create the different data types that we're going to be using now as we build out the application. So what we'll do is we'll go to our tasks, create task. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a schema and model. Well, let's keep a schema. I'm going to create a schema for users. Select an epic, and we'll say for data models. We're going to create a task. We're going to need to create a schema for accounts. Let's see. Let's go ahead and add a little bit to these two, I think. So if I am a user, right? So in our app, we're creating users. Users should have, let's go ahead and say, kind of like start outlining some of the things that we want people to have to while we're creating these. All right, let's dive a little deeper. So a user comes to our app, they're registering. What do we want them to have? So the first thing is they're going to need to have an ID. We're going to want to have a username. We're going to need their email. We're going to need their password. We're going to probably want a first name and a last name. So this is going to be a string, hash string. So, okay. Yeah, I think that's probably good, right? So user comes in, we're going to have them create a first name, last name, provide their email, password, and a username. And then once it's created, it'll assign them an ID. Yeah, I think that sounds nice. Next, we have our accounts. Our accounts are probably going to be pretty simple. Really everything's just going to be lists and tasks associated to an account. So accounts should have, and they're going to have an ID, and I guess they're going to have an account owner. And I think that's probably it. You know, in the future, if we want to add more members, we can add it, right? Whenever I'm building an application, I always kind of think you want to add more data than you need, right? Sometimes it can be nice to add stuff preemptively, but I generally think when you're building data models, don't build out what you don't need yet, right? You want to build it in a way that you can add data models and you can add information to data models as it becomes a need, but to not add more than you do initially. So we're going to keep it as that ID and account owner. So the next thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a schema for lists. Assign this to me, and we're going to put it on our data models epic. So the lists, or a list, right? Because a list should contain. So whenever you come in, a list is going to need an ID. Everything's going to need to have an ID. We're going to want to name our list. And then our list is going to need to be associated to an account. Right, and we'll just put in parentheses, link to the account that owns the list. So you're going to just create the name, and then we're going to add tasks, and they're going to be associated to the list. Yeah, I think that looks good. So the next one is we're going to want to create a schema for tasks. So again, sign it to our data models epic, and then we're going to say a task should contain. So the task is again going to have an ID. Let's see, what else do we want to put on here? So when someone comes in, we're going to want to name the task. We're going to want to give the task a description. So optional, right? Description. Well, do we want to? I mean, I've got my task, you know, buy groceries. Do we need more than a description or more than a name? You know, I don't think we do. Let's leave the description out. All right, we'll name the task. I don't think we need more details than just the single line task name. We'll give it a completed, which is going to be a Boolean. And then we're going to say list. It's associated to a list. Link to the list that the task belongs to. We'll submit that. So then lastly, we're going to say create schema for logs. And I don't know what we're going to want to do for our log schema yet. So we're just going to create that task. We know we have to do it, but we may do that later. We'll add the data values to that later. Okay, so now we got 2 of our epics filled out. Come back, we've got our project, we've got our data models. The next is going to be our authentication. So our tasks. I will say, I want to take a second to talk about the authentication for a bit. We're setting this up on our stuff ourselves just to give the knowledge of how this thing works. If you research online, everyone's going to tell you to use a pre-baked solution. right? But those cost money, and they, I think it's helpful to know how they function, how they work. You're going to get a lot of knowledge by building out your authentication through this, right? I just saying, like, if I was going to build another application that I had like funding for, I probably would use a pre-established solution. But there's nothing wrong with building your own solution, if you're willing to maintain it. And whenever you're learning an environment like this, I think it's helpful to actually build your own solution, because it allows you to, um, learn how those solutions function. And when we're done with this, you will have, I mean, you could release that product with the authentication solution that we're using. So I just wanted to call that out, that there are more robust options than what we'll be building, that don't make you, you know, rely on building your own authentication. Like if I go to Auth0, like this is a pretty popular one, right? Secure, you know, it's like it handles all the authentication for you, right? It's a pretty good option. It's what I use for Lancer, right? So I just wanted to throw that out there. Take it for what you will, but in this particular project, again, we're going to create our own, be a good learning experience, and it's still going to be a nice, robust authentication. So let's go ahead and create our tasks for it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is, let's say, create a front end registration form. Let's see, do we want to add any context in here? So let's just say we need create a form that allows users to enter their email, username, password, first name, and last name. And then if the username or email is already in use, users should see an error message. Let's see. Yeah. So they have to create a unique username and email. Yeah. Cool. Submit. So the next thing we're going to want to do is going to be, let's create a registration API. Let's see what we want to do for that. So we're going to say a registration API needs to be created that allows the front end to pass registration information to the server. These requests should look for if emails and usernames are already in use, and if not, create the user along with the account and save them to the database. So then the API should consist, well, let's just say if the username or email are already in use, the server should send a error back to the front end. The API should consist of a route, a controller, and a service. And we'll get into these later on. But it's essentially everything that consists of an API that's going to then allow us to, you know, create that full functionality. So after creating the registration API, well, let's say we need to create a login API. So say an API needs to be created for logging in. This should allow users to pass in their username or email along with their password and validate if the user is authenticated or not. If the user is authenticated, their information should be passed back to the front end. And if not, then an error message should be returned. Yeah. So next is going to be let's say creating a login form, a front end. A form needs to be created in the Angular app that allows users to enter in their login information and send it to the backend. Alrighty. So next, the big piece is going to be setting up JSON Web Tokens for authentication. So for this task, what we're going to do is a JSON Web Token. What do I want to say? JSON Web Token needs to be set up to allow for the registration and authentication. Let's say just for the authentication. Signing. This token will enable us to let's just say token will enable us to validate that users are authenticated as well as pass data to the front end. And we can get into what these are later on if you're not sure what a JSON Web Token is, but it's going to be kind of the core of how our authentication works. So what's next? So we've got our user comes in, they can register, they can log in. We're gonna need a dashboard to send them to. So create dashboard. So when users register or log in, they should be sent to a dashboard. that only allows logged in users to view it. Which means we're also going to need to, well, we'll do that. Well, we'll just put one. We're going to say create a auth guard in Angular for authenticated users. So essentially what this means is that when users visit the site, they must be authenticated. If not, they need to be directed to the login page to make this determination. We are going to set up a guard to use on our pages that makes this check for each user and page view. All right. So the next we're going to say, I think this is going to be our last thing too. Yeah. So we're going to say set up password change. So along with any sort of authentication, users must be able to click a forgot password link that will allow them to receive an email and change their password. This is going to require a couple temporary tokens that will be generated on request and expire. And we can get more into that again while we tackle those tasks. So each of these tasks can be broken down into subtasks. You know, we're just kind of outlining the tasks we need to do for each of our epics in order to get to complete our stuff. So I think that's it for our authentication, right? And like as we go through, you're going to see, right, these tasks are going to get expanded, and you know, we're going to create all sorts of things inside our Angular app, and like, you know, we'll really start to see this take shape as we start working on it. So the next thing we have is we've got our authentication. So let's create our profile. So what we're going to do is we're going to say set up an account page. And this is going to be the create profile functionality. So we're going to say an account page is to be created. This will allow users to view their profile and account information. There should be a section to view the username, email, first name, last name, and profile picture, as well as an option to remove the account. Gosh dang, can't spell today. And reset the password. Say update password. All right, submit. Get our next task. So this is going to be to create ability to edit first and last name. Let's see what we want to do with this one. So users should be able to edit their first and last name. This should be implemented through a edit profile API that we will build that allows for certain fields to be edited and others not. Currently, the only values we want to edit are the first and last name, or the name. And then we're going to need to create ability to update password. The user needs the ability to update their password. In this case, they are already logged in. So we should make them validate their password, their current password, and potentially validate through email with the code. This will require an API or multiple. We'll say one, just find an API that will handle the core functionality. Oh, it actually might be more APIs. Require multiple APIs to complete. So the next that we're going to want to do is to update the profile picture. Create ability to update profile picture. I usually separate the picture and the other data apart from each other simply because there's a different way. You got to do it whenever you're submitting files like pictures, you got to submit them differently than you do other data. So the user should have the ability to change their profile picture. The picture should be required to be a square that they can crop and then saved to an AWS S3 bucket. That's where we're going to save it. And the link will be saved to their database value. So actually going to store the picture in AWS S3, and then when the link's created, we're going to save that link inside the profile picture value, right? That's how I've always handled it. I think that's the best way to do it. So the next thing we're going to do is we've got our profile functionality. Let's view our epics. Let's see what we've got. So we've got set up project, create authentication, data models, profile. So let's do the account. This should be a nice simple one. So let's just say create, well, we'll just say the account's going to be created whenever they register. So we're just going to say set up the ability to delete an account. Users should have the ability to delete their account. If a user deletes their account, both the account and user should be removed. The user should see a confirmation message before deleting permanently. Deleting. I think that's the only thing we need to do for our accounts. So next one is going to be creating our list functionality. So let's go ahead and what do we want to add for this? So we need to create a list page. Users should have the ability to view a list page that displays the name of the list along with the ability to edit the list name. Users should also have the ability to view the pending tasks in the list. Finally, users should have the ability to delete a list. Submit. So that, again, if you can see when I create these pages, I'm just putting the different features on there, and then we add that functionality through the other tasks. So we're going to go ahead and say display lists on the dashboard. So that's how you'll get to the lists. Users should have the ability to see their lists on their dashboard and click into a list. So next one, we're going to say create ability to create a new list. So in this, users should have the ability to create a new list. This should be available in the navigation bar and the dashboard. And then what's next? So we've created it. So then we need enable ability to edit lists. Users should have the ability to edit a list name. Nice and simple. Still need to create a task for it. And then create a task. Enable ability to delete a list. Users should have the ability to delete a list. So if we created it, edit, delete it, view it, I think we're good. Then create task. So let's go ahead and move on to our tasks. So we're going to say create ability to create task. I'm just going to say users should have ability to create a task when inside a list. Let's see, we probably want to add it in the navigation bar as well. Have the ability to create a task inside a list or through the navigation bar. However, when a task is created, it must be assigned to a list. So we'll make sure that it has to be assigned to a list whenever it's being created. Then we'll say create ability to complete a task. Users should have the ability to complete a task. This functions the same as deleting a task. Once a task is completed, it will be removed from the list and the database. So essentially you just click mark it done, and that's the same. You mark it completed, you delete it, you're just getting it off the list, you're removing that task. It's out of sight, it's done. Submit. And I think that's all we need for our tasks. And then finally, let's go ahead and, I guess not finally, the next thing we need to do, it's probably going to be one of the more first things we do, is going to be create our navigation bar. And this one I don't think is going to need to have an epic. So users should see a navigation bar. This should have a dashboard link along with buttons to create a task and a list. There should also be a profile picture that takes the user, that has a drop down that shows the account or log out options. So then we'll also do a create ability to log out. And that's going to go with profile functionality. So then I think our last tasks are going to be associated with our deploying our application. So first one is going to be deploying staging site. So the Angular app will need to be deployed on a AWS Amplify staging environment, and the Nest.js server will need to be deployed on a AWS App Runner application. We're just going to copy that, submit, and then we're going to say deploy production application. Amplify production environment, and the Nest.js server will need to put in an app run application. And I mean, we'll create our subtasks and stuff as we go. All right, and I think that really sums it up. Go ahead and view this and remove this task. Let's go ahead and delete this task there. All righty. So I think that this looks good. Let's go ahead and look at our epics. We've got setting up the project, creating our data models. We'll create our authentication. From creating our authentication, we're going to create that profile functionality and account functionality. And we'll create our list task functionality. And then we're going to wrap that all up by deploying our application. That sounds good to me, right? It's a good, I know there's a lot of tasks here, but it's very doable. We're going to learn a lot while we do it. And I think this is going to be a good project. I'm excited to do this. So I know it was pretty time intensive to go through and plan out the project like this, but I encourage you to just like follow these steps. Really think about everything that you would need to do to build out this application. And if you haven't ever done this before, just following along with what I did will be good enough, because as we build, it's going to make more sense. So then whenever you do it on your own, like, oh yeah, I need to do that whenever I'm creating this, you know, when I'm creating this authentication or when I'm setting up this project, right? Or creating those data models. Like, this is how that's done. These are the type of tasks that we need to create, the subtasks that are created for it, right? So I know this has been a long one, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here. I'm happy to cross this threshold because the next thing is going to be to, you know, start actually digging into some code, you know, booting up our IDE and actually creating our application for our Nest.js server and our Angular app. So I'm really looking forward to it. I'll see you guys in the next lesson, and thanks for listening.